Well, we're all back. Thank you for returning. Thank you. I hope you got a chance to stand up and improve your circulation. As you can see, I've dressed up for the occasion because I always was important to, keep warm. The fan is blowing directly on me, so I hope you have found a comfortable position. We wanted to have a conversation about just some of the circumstances that a lot of our churches are in, and to answer any of the questions that we might. I'd like to bring Jill Ollinger on to share with you a little bit about some of the ways that the board of directors has been trying to respond to your needs as churches, and how we might continue to do that best. Jill, are you on and able to speak with us?
I am. Yes, I'm here. And hopefully there's not an echo for other folks as there is for me here.
You sound good on our end.
Okay, great. Sounds good. I see, it looks like we still have 62 attendees on and panelists. I'm seeing 13 there, 75 participants. That tells me a lot, because I know all of you have got to be quite weary of the day, weary of being in front of your computer and of these Zoom meetings, despite probably feeling joy, I hope, at the outcome of our annual gathering. But it tells me that there is a lot of interest ongoing with how, when, why we find ways to come back together again in person in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the things that the board recognized early on is that it would be critical for us to fulfill our mission by truly equipping our congregations to find ways to discern and make decisions. Early on in this pandemic, I can look back and say that the guidance was easy, because the answer was stay home. There was not enough health capacity. There was not enough ability to mitigate, and there was alignment from our public health authorities that what we needed to do was to simply be apart from each other. Certainly the most dire and most drastic method of mitigating the spread of this disease. As things have moved along, the virus is still here, but we are, as a people, getting more and more knowledgeable about how we might manage, how we might live with this virus, and try and prevent how to die from it. But we're not that much further along. There are no pharmaceutical interventions, and we really truly need to rely on behavioral changes if in fact we want to come back together. And so we are continuing as a board to try and find ways to equip you as clergy, to equip you as lay leaders, to discern and to make decisions about how you would actually come back together, if you should even come back together given your circumstances. Our latest survey showed us that what we continue to need help with as congregations is really to understand how to take the myriad of inputs that are out there in the world to try and make decisions that fit for our individual lives and for our individual congregations. And we're no longer at a point where the conference can give kind of a unidirectional type guidance, which says, suspend your worship service. We realized in May that the next step needed to be planning. And it's very apparent from the response to this survey that churches have engaged, who have been planning. The outcome of those plans are fairly wide-ranging in terms of returning to worship or choosing not to do that at this point in time. And there is clearly tension amongst folks between the sorrow and the lament of being apart but also wanting to balance that with the risk of not causing physical harm, but then wanting to re-engage in the spiritual nourishment that comes from being together. And so the conversation today probably really needs to be about what things you need help with doing. Our proposal from the board will be a couple of different things. In addition to continuing some of the outreach of our WISE team, our spiritual care team, continuing to send resource links as we see them from public areas that seem that they fit our needs. Finding ways to support you generally. We intend to actually also really establish clergy communities of practice to help support people. We realize, though, that we have a role to play in continuing to monitor public information and to pass that along to you in ways that you can translate and interpret it into what you need to do with your congregation. And so as we think about what that looks like, I am seeking thoughts or input from you about what might actually help. What are the points of conflict? What are the points of confusion such that we can begin to address those? And with that, I'm going to be quiet for a little bit.
Thank you, Jill. As you can tell, I put up one of the memes that the Kentucky Council of Churches helped develop that we have been using on our social media, and this has been spread around from church to church. The Kentucky Council of Churches, as you know, is very well supported by we're very grateful for the support we get from the Indiana-Kentucky Conference of the UCC. I happen to be serving a term as president of that august body now. We're 11 different denominations working together, and they reflected so much of what you've already said, which is that whether Catholic to Baptist-Costal, we've all had to sort of invent how it is we're going to both keep each other safe as well as respond to these ever-shifting conditions. I'm going to try and change my myself back to the right screenshot here. Just a second. There we go. We have probably an opportunity for some questions. It's been a challenge. I know that in our survey, even it reflects there's a lot of folks who want to get back to worship and are anxious and have been able to do that safely. There are a lot of people who want to get back to worship and aren't sure that it's going to be safe. There's people who have gotten back to worship and they've made it safe, but found that some of their parishioners haven't yet figured it out. What do we know right now about the state of things in, let's start with Indiana, and I can report on Kentucky. What's the state of the infection where you are, and then I can report here.
So in Indiana, the most recent results that I've looked at were yesterday. And in terms of a caseload for the state overall, it remains at a very slight decline, but it's looking at a rolling 7-day average. And if anyone has questions about what some of this means, I'm happy to explain the terms. But we're seeing it slowly decrease. With the exception of the last 2 days, we had an uptick. So whereas we were generally seeing cases in the area of kind of the 200s, sometimes bumping up to the 300s, Thursday and Friday, each of those days was over 500. Capacity from a healthcare perspective is good in Indiana. There remain plenty of hospital beds and ventilators. So if someone does become sufficiently ill that they need that type of care and treatment, our healthcare systems are capable of providing it. And I do think it's important for people to recognize that when the state talks about what it means to be safe here in Indiana, what they mean is that they can diagnose if you have COVID, they can trace if you have tested positive and been in contact with other people, and they can treat you if you get ill. So their guiding principles here in the state of Indiana are built around those things. They are not built around necessarily eliminating the virus or about nobody ever getting it. But they do, but their guidelines then for how businesses conduct themselves, how churches might conduct themselves, are designed to mitigate and reduce the risk of transmission and contracting it, but not necessarily eliminating it.
And I'd say the same. Let's say the same is true in Kentucky. Although we're seeing quite a slight increase in the last several days, we're now seeing daily case rates moving where we were at the sort of 175 to 200. Now we're in the 275 to 300 for the last 5 days, and so they're watching that very closely here in Kentucky. We've had a couple questions in the chat as well. One of them was from James Setta Ferguson about, figured out lots of the COVID things for churches, but the bathroom one is hardest. And some of the data, just for those of you who don't know, is that the virus sheds very easily through, shall we say, effluvium, biological effluvium. So what happens is, what they detected is that when you flush a toilet, it sends aerosolized particles, many of which will contain the virus, up to 6 feet into the air and around that toilet. So what they're asking, what the Kentucky guidance here is that after each person's use, handles and surfaces have to be wiped. Now, they were not saying that you had to wipe walls down or mop the floors, but antiseptic wipe or spray for any surface like faucet, toilet seat, handles of the toilet, handles of the doors, light switches, all of that probably needs to be wiped down after every single use. What that means in practice is that you pretty much have to have a bathroom attendant. Several colleagues and I have talked about this, and we've been, different people have actually tried to implement this. I think possibly in smaller churches, and looking to see if other churches have experience with this. We'd love to see in the comments or whatever. If you'd like to talk, you can raise your hand in the participant chat, and I can unmute you so we can share together. If you've found a better way, in places where you have a small group that can be responsible, you could possibly get away with everyone being on their own recognizance. I think that is an unwise strategy. Experience with humans, I don't know if you've met any humans recently, but even the most attentive people among us are just not yet drilled into thinking about this. And because the consequence of not thinking about it is not immediate, it's even worse. What we're finding in studies here is that, if you touch a hot stove, you shake back, you jerk back, and you can think about it. But if you contact the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, it may be a week before you even show symptoms. That means that it's difficult to connect the result of the behavior to what instigated it. And that is the very worst thing for human beings. We're very poor at changing behavior when there's not an immediate consequence. Some in the chats have said one bathroom at a time, and everybody has the wipes out. And in reality, this is from Kay, aerosol does not disappear quickly. And there are places that are saying that they want to do an antiviral mist. That's certainly something. Aerosolized hydrogen peroxide is something that the schools here are considering to try and clean the school air as well as surfaces. But that, of course, is well beyond the capacity for most churches. That would be a multi-thousand, if not multi-$100,000 enterprise for a facility that's as large as churches. A question from Sarah Lund about what guidelines do you guys have for reopening the schools that meet in our church buildings?
We don't have anything specific to schools that meet in church buildings. You would need to take a look at both specifically what the state is putting together for a school type situation that would be similar to what you have going on in your church. So some churches may have preschools, some may have after school programs. These have very different configurations, whether it's the age groups, the number of children, the types of activities that they might be involved in. Obviously, even youth type programs. We have not addressed those specifically, and really the best guidance you're likely to get is going to be the guidances that are being put out by public health authorities that address those situations, and that other organizations have been putting together that are in a similar situation, similar type of congregate setting, really, as what a school would be.
My advice has been that you also look to other preschools and daycares that are in your area that are licensed. While their requirements as a licensed one in some areas exceeds what you need to do, when it comes to COVID-19, I think they will be very similar, that you'll be on the same plane for COVID-19 precautions. And they have been, many of them, in fact, have been serving already children throughout the entire process, as they've had children of essential workers in their facility all along. So those would be some good people to connect with and network with to see how they've been handling some procedures.
Thanks, Jim. As for those of you who don't know, Jim Jensen is a insurance guru and consults with lots of our churches about best practices and safety. Lynn Young's asked, what choices are churches that are going back in-person worship? What are they doing about singing? Singing is incredibly problematic, and this has been a great sorrow to so many of us. The problem with singing is that you take in more air, so you're more likely to receive virus particles. You also, when you sing, that 6 feet distance extends to at least 10 to 20 feet. And what the study has, recent studies shown that the Kentucky Council of Churches was relying upon. This was a study by the National Association of Teachers of Singing and a study funded by the American Choral Directors Society. It shows that those particles remain in the air up to 18 to 20 minutes. They showed a study that showed rapid infection rates from a person who walked through a space where singing had happened 15 minutes prior. So it's not just the act of singing itself, it's then sitting in the room where singing has happened. Multiply that by 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 people in a room, and you can see that singing is exceptionally problematic. For that reason, the Kentucky Council of Churches guidance has been, do not sing. You cannot sing or play wind instruments safely. It is not possible to do. And even if you wear a mask, it's not safe for you to sing well because you're increasing the carbon dioxide that you're taking in. So that's unfortunate. It has really meant from there that they are recommending that until there is a vaccine, that there can be no congregant singing that is safe. Now, that said, I also report to you that almost all of the churches have thought that that's not something they're going to follow, and that a lot of them have figured out either to have a cantor, the praise band, they try to socially distance that, put them further away. I think all of that will help. But it really is probably best if you're going to have any singing at all, like maybe your praise band, then everybody else has to be masked if you're going to be safe. If you're going to be safe. And I'm kind of, as a, I realize I'm saying this quite forcefully, and I realize this just isn't a Second Amendment matter to me. This isn't a First Amendment matter to me. This is a matter of, I would like to have the same number of sheep in my flock at the end of this year as we started it with. And to do that, we really have to take seriously that the health consequences are quite severe. Now, I have a good news story to share, and that is that there was a recent report about a hairdresser's that reopened in Kentucky here very recently. And they were not wearing masks. The two hairdressers, stylists, they were not wearing masks. And in fact, they did contract the virus, and in fact, were both hospitalized. But 100% of their clients wore masks, even though the stylist did not. And the clients, not one of 140 contacts got sick because they wore a face covering. So wearing the face covering does seem to be a very helpful strategy. It certainly helps prevent the spread from your own aerosolized breathing particles, and it may prevent, it certainly reduces you being able to receive them. So if you're going to be in a high-risk activity like singing, I think you have to consider singing a very high-risk activity if you're going to be anywhere near anybody. then the more people you can keep distant from those particles, the better. Just understand that when you sing, those particles are going to go about 10 to 12 feet. So, other questions that you might have. If you'd like to, you can raise your hand on the, if you're in the Zoom chat, you can raise your hand. You can put your questions in the chat. You can also raise your hands up on the participants list, and we can unmute you if you'd like to speak. Jim, I have a question about insurance. Is it too soon to know, I know we'll get to Sam here, is it too soon to know whether insurance rates are being affected by this now, or do you know?
It is a bit too soon. The major factor that is going to be coming into this is what the financial markets mean to the insurance industry, as well as what kind of claims get paid out. One of the major pieces of claims that's going to be litigated and may even have some congressional action taking place is there are proposals to require the insurance companies to go back and pay for lost income that results from being closed as a result of the pandemic, which, as many people have probably heard, because there was no direct damage to any property, those provisions and policies to cover lost income were not triggered. However, our industry estimates that if they are forced to go back and do that, it will take over $400 billion a month or a quarter, I don't remember which it is, out of the industry to pay all those claims, and essentially the insurance industry would be bankrupt in about 3 months.
Gotcha.
That would obviously affect rate.
Yeah.
Aside from that, holding that aside, we'll keep that little alarm bell off to the side because there's nothing
Right.
forcing that yet. But aside from that, I do expect we'll see some increases because we're seeing, the insurance companies rely not only on how well their claims are, but also on their investment income to balance that out.
Got it. We've got a couple questions. Sam Boyer, I think I'm saying your name right. I've unmuted you. If you can unmute yourself, then you can join the conversation.
Yeah, hopefully I'm unmuted now. My wife works with the libraries, and we recently moved from Ohio to Indiana, and the Battelle labs in Columbus, Ohio are a wonderful lab. They're excellent in all that they've done. They've just concluded a recent study on the COVID virus on library materials that go in and out of libraries. And I think churches can benefit by this because I see questions about pew cushions and papers and such. And so if you go to their site and view that, at most the virus lasted no longer than 3 days on I forget what it was, on certain book materials, on certain book covers, and otherwise, and on paper inside the book. Otherwise, most of it disappeared within about 24 hours. So be sure to look at that study, because I think it benefits us as churches in how we might move forward. Because essentially, if nobody worships in the community for 1 week, it's gone in the worship service, so you don't need to worry about it.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Good point. Thanks so much, James Setta. I've got you unmuted. You can unmute yourself and join in.
I'm wondering if face shields, along with masks, would help with choirs and musicians playing during service.
I think that's a really good question, and I can only answer from what little I know. Face shields really do help, and what they are primarily used for in medical settings, as you obviously probably know, is to keep the virus from entering through eyes. Eyes and passages, they do help prevent some aerosolization in that the air you expel hits that face shield, but it doesn't go away. So for singing, what they're saying is that face shield is very helpful for blocking transmission out from you, but it can't protect you from sucking in particles, the infected particles from somewhere else, unless you're also wearing a mask. But of course, if you're also wearing a mask, it's very difficult to sing. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag. It may be possible, it would certainly help. but you'd still need to keep musicians and folks at least 10 feet apart from other people who would be singing, I think, with a face shield or without, just because it's going to put that into the atmosphere.
And
yeah,
may I speak about the question regarding liability?
Please.
Okay, a question came up, and I've heard questions from other churches that have called me directly about this as well, asking about their liability. Should somebody contract COVID at the church or as a result of a church activity, or if they think they do? There's a few different pieces of this that apply. Number one, they need to be able to show that they actually contracted it there, and not on their way there or where they stop for breakfast on the way to church or right after church for lunch. So that's a complicated issue by itself that makes it an interesting discovery path. But they also need to show that you were negligent. We don't simply owe them anything just because they got sick. It has to be a result of negligence. So I've spoken with an attorney about this from the conference perspective. And there is a concept of assumed risk. When you go out into the world today and leave your home, and you go to the store, you go to the hardware store, the grocery store, you go to church, you stop at the gas station, all these different activities that you do, you are assuming some risk. We do this every day, but it's a different risk that we're assuming regarding COVID, and more specific about that as you make your decisions about what's safe and what is not. So the same thing applies when they come to your church. They are assuming some risk when they come there. There's a general level of which they can expect you should be doing. And I would suggest that if you are doing any less than CDC guidelines, they will have a better case to show that you were negligent if they get sick at church. Because that's the very common accepted level of standard right now that we need to take care to protect our visitors and guests. Is to at least maintain that level. There could be some argument as to whether that's enough. What's not in there, singing's not in the CDC guidelines. We've talked about that here. There's some other pieces that may not be in CDC. So I would recommend you go a little bit above CDC guidelines in order to accomplish that. Relevant to that, it was brought up the question of should you be requiring people to sign waivers as they check in at church to come to worship or to come to a small group meeting. And the advice that we received was probably not, because of that assumption of risk argument. However, for me, since I'm not the legal advice here, and I am only translating that, and we do have two different states represented here, I would throw the final answer on that to check with your local council.
Check with your lawyer. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that it is complicated, and someone, Alice asked about what about someone who contracts COVID-19 at the preschool at the church. I think there's some additional issues that's probably something you need to check with your own counsel or lawyer about. Different states have different rules about who's responsible and who can be sued. Generally, you can be sued straight up the line, but there are often ways that gets mitigated. One of the things we've done at Union Church here is we've asked outside groups to abide by certain rules. And we have those in writing so that we say, look, we required them to do this. If they didn't do it, that's on them. And that may be a solution where you are as well. I think the bigger question is, what do you do about how do we be the church? I mean, I think this is not just about the mechanicals, but how do we be the loving, faithful congregations to those folks who've contracted in our spaces? One of the responses is one of the things that we've talked about. We are talking about whether to open. We're watching the numbers here to see if that's going to be safe. We have decided to stay closed through the month of July because numbers in Kentucky are going up. Others have decided that they're able to open safely. Our building has its own constraints, as yours does, May, as well. But one of the things we've talked about is we probably will want to be able to contact the people who do come to any event of ours to let them know so they can get the earliest possible treatment. If someone comes down with COVID, it's not about stigmatizing. It's about we want to make sure that everybody knows immediately to watch for symptoms so they can get early treatment to be as safe as possible. And I'm not sure that the media has done, we've had a chance to absorb it, but you don't have to die from this illness to suffer gravely. My wife works at a hospital, and the complications from COVID-19 happen for a long time after your illness, quote unquote, recovery, can be literally months long, and particularly if you're in any of the high risk categories. But even not, the surge we're seeing in Kentucky right now is among 20 and 30-year-olds. Because why? Because bars and restaurants reopened. And people are bored, and of course they're frustrated, and they want to be close to each other. But that's where the infection is now rising, both in Texas and here, and Arizona, and California, and lots of places. And those folks are ending up with strokes. Those folks are ending up, they're surviving. They don't die from the illness, but they're finding all kinds of blood clotting issues and all kinds of pancreas. It turns out the coronavirus attacks the pancreas. And so long-term clinical problems that can literally be life-changing the rest of your life is a possible result of this. So, James Setta.
No.
Nope. Okay. All right.
We do have a question from Emily Slade. Looking for comment about pastoral care visits.
Right. I don't know what some of the rest of you are doing. This is a place where I've been using a face shield because it's sort of that's what singing is just too, you know, I sing too loud. Nobody wants to hear me sing anyway. But the face shield there with visits on an earlier meeting, Rachel Small-Stokes was reporting that she has been able to use a face shield to be socially distant from her elderly members who can read lips. She has a person who can really then understand her much better. She's used a little personal amplifier so that the person can hear her loudly, but she can still stand or sit outside distanced. I've begun doing outside porch visits, what I call porch visits. I'm masked, I ask them to mask, and we sit outside on porches, and that's been very well received. What are some of the others of you doing? I see there's some people putting some things in the chat right now. Yes, absolutely. Yes, and you're right. Jean's put in there that yes, it attacks lungs, kidneys, brain. You can't predict what it lodges in, and that's really true. That's really true. Yeah, and the oh, Rachel's on there. Thank you, Rachel. Didn't see you on there. Didn't mean to speak for you. There's a little mic that goes under your face shield, and then other people can hear you. It's very, very helpful and inexpensive, about $35 or something like that. So that's a good possibility. The other care that we need to talk about that I think is vital is for churches to take the lead. I think one of the ways, opportunities for us, is to really take the lead with our nurses, our healthcare, our public health officials. You may have seen just how wearing this is on our health staff. I mean, it is, for those who are on the front lines, you've got people yelling at you because you're taking away my rights. You can't make me wear a mask. I won't do it, blah, blah, blah. And then you have the other side of people going, if you'd only told me sooner, my husband, my child, my grandmother would still be healthy and well. So those folks are getting it on all sides. And there's an opportunity for us here to really be a caring and supportive environment for those who are working so hard to protect our lives. If you've got nurses and doctors and public health officials in your church, this would be an excellent time to bake them some cookies, to send them some flowers, to reach to them with a gospel word, to support them with some truly Christian love, because I have heard frightening statistics, even just in Kentucky, of the number of healthcare workers who are considering quitting entirely or having to take leaves of absence from the stress. Chaplains fall into that category. Here's a big shout out to all of our UCC chaplains. Let me just tell you, I am so impressed with the crew of our UCC chaplains. The ones, I don't know you all, but I know a lot of you, and I am just so grateful for you because you are there when we can't be in the hospitals right now. I want to just say that that's another thing that the chaplains asked me to share with you, which is that don't go to the hospital yourself. You are a vital person as a clergy person and even as a family member, but do call on your chaplains. Let them help you. Let them be your emissary while this crisis continues, because we do not leave people alone, and we've got chaplains on the ground. And if you don't know your local one at your local hospital, oh, I hope you'll make that call, because we need them more than ever.
We have a question from Rose Austin at St. Peter's UCC in Du Bois. She says, what about suggestions on carry-ins and memorial dinners held at church? Can this be done safely? Will it go away totally?
Yeah, so the recommendation from the health department here in Kentucky, and I can't speak for Indiana, is no food sharing unless it's been commercially prepared. So they have just this last month opened up catered gatherings, but everybody has to, you can't have anything where you're touching the food. It needs to be plated by someone who's gloved, masked, sterile, in that way. Can you hear me okay? Am I breaking up?
No, you're all right.
Okay. So, so the food sharing is problematic, but it's not impossible. So one of the things that we've talked about, various churches have shared, people bringing picnics has become very popular in Kentucky. So everybody brings a picnic and you sit socially distanced on the ground, but you can at least see each other. Everybody has to be masked except for when eating. If you have commercially prepared food for a memorial dinner, yes, but you are then putting people in great proximity, and every spoon that they touch, every time somebody breathes on top of the roast beef, every one of those things is an opportunity for infection. So it is problematic, not impossible. Packaged, where people have found the most success, is having a caterer who produces a pre-packaged meal that's in its individual container. Something like a nice tray that would have all the sides and everything inside of it. It's closed. That's handed to each individual. This is how we're feeding our children for the food support during this time when they're out of school. So that's prepared in a commercially prepared kitchen by trained and licensed food handlers. They are then prepackaged so that you're only touching the food that you're going to touch, and ideally you're washing your hands before you open that box, and just to make sure. So that's I hope that give some things. Coffee pots, TJ's right. Yeah. Lori's got a question. Do we have any idea how many of our IKC churches are having in-person worship now? Actually, we do have a little sense of that, don't we, Jill?
Yes, I actually just typed the response into the chat. And so from the survey we did, we got 53 different congregations responding to that, either clergy or lay. And 18 of those congregations said that they have either already started or plan to start in-person worship by the 5th of July. Another 12 had indicated that they might be starting in July. And then the remaining, it would be the remaining 23 congregations, so about half of them, said it will be sometime after the beginning of August, or we have not even set a time frame. So we really have a very wide range across the conference, from starting soon to definitely not starting real soon.
Great, thank you. Izzy would like to speak to the issue of providing therapy and counseling. Great, Izzy, let me, are you online that you can talk?
Yes, I am. Thank you. So my other job is I'm a therapist as well. Have a master's in social work and provide mental health and therapy sessions for all kinds of things, but specifically for addictions. And of course, this time right now is incredibly stressful for people who are struggling with addictions. Connected to our church, we have a small building called Stepping Stones, which provides all kinds of 12-step meetings. And we had a lot of discussion around how we would handle 12-step meetings happening in the buildings, and we left it up to the individual groups that meet there to keep the building safe and sanitized for their individual meetings. We decided not to impose any restrictions there, but I can tell you just from looking at the parking lot that most groups were extremely responsible and decided to shut down for an extended period of time. all of my counseling sessions, I've been doing those via Zoom. And so if you provide counseling, if you have congregants that you're working with, or even people outside the church, encourage them to use cell phones, do a phone call, do FaceTime, or do something with Zoom, or even Skype, or, you know, any of the other kinds of things that you can use. Even with Facebook, you can, you know, do a group kind of thing or whatever. The other thing that I would like to say is pay attention to the numbers, because I'm in Elkhart and we're one of the hot spots right now. Our numbers, even though the total numbers are going down in Indiana, we're going up, up, up. And it's frightening. And when I'm outside and I'm looking around at people, they're not wearing masks. And there's no reason that they can't wear a mask, because we've made like tons and tons and tons of masks. So people should have them. They should wear them. And I try to keep some in my car, you know, so it's really important when you go to the grocery store or you're out in public, please save a life, put a mask on. It's pretty simple. We are not going to start meeting anytime soon as far as church or any kind of events in the church. Because our congregation is an aging congregation, and safety first. That's just our motto right now, safety first. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to say you made a point that I forgot to make, which is that for those of you who might be on the call who don't know, you know, you can get a Zoom account. They're free for a personal Zoom account. If you want to have a paid account, you can get that as low as $12 or $12.50 a month for your church, for example, which allows you to have up to 100 people. You can pay slightly more to get up to 500 people or whatever. But this is this technology. Google Meet is another one. Skype for Business. I mean, there's a variety of ways that if your church has not considered purchasing a paid license that gives you the easiest flexibility for your pastor or yourself, it's relatively inexpensive, far less than you'd pay for mileage in one, you know, for your staff. And it's well worth thinking about. I've done a lot of pastoral care visits now with folks this way. And we've even taken iPads to people who who weren't technologically savvy or didn't think they were. And with iPads, we were able to say, okay, press the FaceTime button and my face will soon appear. And they were able to figure it out. So, yeah. My friends, I know that our time is drawing to a close, and we are so grateful to all of you for sticking around. We've put this whole thing on the YouTube channel as well, so if you'd like to know, you might find things that are in the chat. There is a dot at the bottom of the chat that will allow you to save it to your own computer. There's 3 little dots there. If you're on a tablet or a cell phone, you may have to find a special menu, but if you tap somewhere in the chat, it should say Save Chat. And if you save the chat, that will put it in your document folder. You'll be able to plow back through that. We will, of course, save the chat, but this will give you the opportunity to have all those comments and things saved, and you might want to do that just because there's a lot of good ideas, and thanks to all of you. You know, what we learned about this in Kentucky, and I'm sure it's true in Indiana too, is that, you know, one size fits one. Every church has a different setup, a different makeup, a different comfort level. The virus, however, doesn't care about how it is that it infects you. It's just no respecter of persons that way. And so anything that you're doing that's keeping your people safe, it's putting the love into the world, that's what matters. And we're trying our level best to be faithful here, and I know you are there in your setting. So it's probably, like I say, I've grown impatient with people who want to make this an amendment issue. I've made this a Christian issue for me, in the sense of this is about love in action and how we can protect each other. Would we not lay down our lives for our neighbors? Then why won't we pick up a piece of cloth? So I hope that you will, and I hope that we can all stay safe. I hope that next year we can be meeting together in person, and when we do, big hugs, you all. Big, I'm saving them up. Be prepared to be squished. Every one of you, gonna squish you hard. Ooh, missing you. I miss being with people. I'm like Jana last night. I am an extrovert. I like being together. I like making music together. This has been hard on the soul. But I have been so encouraged by the creativity, the faithfulness, and the care that you all have demonstrated to me and through your own ministries. It's been so, so good. So good. With that said, Jill, any closing thoughts?
Yes. So I think it would be important for folks to kind of know what they can expect from the conference here over, I'm going to say, the next month. So we are hopeful to have probably a short version of points to consider, how to continue discerning and planning for a return to worship. This, and that should hopefully come out within the next week to 2 weeks. The other things to be aware of, so the IKC office will not reopen until the beginning of August at the absolute earliest. We will continue operating everybody from a home base, as they've all found ways to make that very effective. We also will begin to look at our staff being able to travel. It will mean that there's certain parameters and boundary conditions around making sure that that's actually an activity that maintains safety for our staff, where safety from our perspective is that they are not at significantly increased risk of contracting the virus. We want them only traveling to places where the numbers are generally low, and where the people that they might be meeting with will in fact be taking safeguards, and are empowering our staff, if they are going to travel, to make a decision if they don't feel safe, that they can turn around and leave, because it's too important that they continue to be part of our staff, and is in a healthy way, spiritually and physically. We will probably be looking at providing additional guidance based on what we heard here today. Our number one thing I think we're going to go address is singing. I know we don't have everybody here participating today, and so we will try and get something pulled together that's really can help people kind of discern what makes most sense for their scenarios. We might need to repeat some of what we've said about liability from an insurance perspective. A lot of questions about that. And then some of the additional things, kind of the one-off questions, we can also begin to address those as we have opportunity through the month of July. And hopefully we will not see a resurgence here in Indiana. Going to be holding my breath, quite frankly, on that one. And we'll see how things continue to go in Kentucky. I strongly encourage everybody, 1, wash your hands. 2, don't go into large crowded areas in small enclosed spaces for long durations of time. So socially distance. 3, do wear a facial covering when you are unable to be distanced from other people. In your home, obviously, you don't need to. In your car, you don't need to. But if you're going to be around other folks and cannot be socially distanced, please wear a mask. It helps protect everybody all the way around. I think that's about it. I appreciate your time, your love, your attention. I really do feel like we are in this together, and have felt that in so many different ways, despite the fact that I can't physically see people. Your responses and just seeing how you continue to find ways to love and serve like Jesus is truly inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you, Jill, and thanks to all of you. We'll end our transmission here, but our service continues tomorrow afternoon. What time, remind everyone, is the worship service?
3.
3 o'clock? 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock, is that 3 o'clock Eastern time, yes? Right, 3 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, 2 o'clock if you are in slow time. So we hope that you'll be able to join us there. Thanks again for all your amazing service. I think in some ways one of the ways God is using this pandemic is to teach us just how much we need each other and how much we need to cooperate and coordinate so that we can be the church. Thanks so much for your willingness to do that. I will leave you with great love and with great peace. Good night, all.